All right, people, here we go. From the void. Thousands of years before the arrival of Bright Star, escapees from dying Earth were transported through the darkness beyond reality itself to a new home. Although the colonists' physical safety was never in danger following their arrival at the Aurora Galaxy, the little group struggled to confront the horrors of a dark past that some wished simply to forget. Meanwhile, one-time Governor Paul Casilla and his twin children, John and Rachel, looked to defend the last free colony of humanity from a future far darker than they could possibly imagine. From the void, year 4 NST, Atraria, Aurora Galaxy. You can't keep taking those kids out into the void, Paul. They should be spending time with children their own age. Matilda Matheson's voice seemed too high-pitched to be real, even coming from her slight frame. Today, her expression was particularly grim, as if it lay upon her shoulders alone to right the wrongs of the universe. She took her presumed role very seriously. No one else ever had the strength to watch the redoubt or to be sure that we weren't attacked unawares, Matilda. I guess I'm doing her voice too now. It shouldn't be the case. Who should I leave with them when I'm gone? They should have a mother, and you know it. Paul Cassadia didn't flinch. The hurt in his eyes was too old and well worn for that, but his expression dulled for a moment underneath her onslaught. Shrew tongue! Rachel Cressida whispered. Shrew tongue! Rachel Cressida whispered sidelong. Not sure how you do that, to her twin brother John. He snorted in amusement, but Paul shot Rachel a sharp, remonstrative look. He shouldn't have heard her at all, from where she and John sat yards away on her picnic blanket. Maybe he was using Energomatic 6. She still couldn't quite tell with her dad. Either way, the glance only lasted a spare moment before he focused his attention on Miss Madison fully and asked Riley, why should they be spending time with Tilda? The other kids know all exactly what they are and exactly how old they are. Everybody who came through here in the dark was still with us, was still aging, and we ain't. I noticed you got a few more gray hairs than you did have that day. Ha ha ha. Paul shook his head ruefully. I don't know how you shake your head ruefully, but he did, to take any sting out of his contempt. I ain't arguing with you, Matilda, but it's only the universe that we live in, and it's far from a perfect universe. She barked a single laugh. Ha! Her tone half humorous and half grim. Which one? We been reborn, Paul. The old world is gone. We left the evil man like Lattice Rowland behind us. It's time to shed the remnants of that old world. None of that darkness can reach us here. Paul shook his head, now entirely grim. I wish I could agree, Matilda, but we escaped from Earth. But human nature is still the same here as was anywhere else. Besides, he trailed off, obviously deep in thought, or obviously not having any thoughts. Matilda waited for him to finish. Then, when he did, she huffed gently and shook her head, half smiling, saying, well, don't be gone too long, Paul Casilla. There are still some of us who remember. She paused for a long moment, unsure why. Her attention an unfathomable distance and many years away. Then shook her head again. She seemed on the verge of speaking. Well, she was just speaking, but thought better of it, obviously giving up, and turned to walk away. I thought she was sitting down. Rachel rolled her eyes and sighed. Her dad just frowned and sat back down next to them, lost in his own thoughts. A second later, John nodded towards the space where he could have seen between Paul and Rachel and grumbled, More company. Paul sighed in turn and glanced over his shoulder, then groaned at the sight of the gray-robed figures walking towards them through the brilliantly green grass. Can't we have a picnic? Fuck up, Paul. Rachel giggled and moved forward. Hope won 100 yards. Proper noun. Hope won 100 yards behind them, stretching towards the sky like a what? Like a gigantic silver finger. Daddy, you sat down in the middle of the city park. What do you expect? Paul grimaced. It's like we never done that before. Rachel rolled her eyes again. 5 years ago, and they pitched a fit too then. Paul grinned at her as he rose to his feet once more. Being a celebrity has some kind of perks, don't it? His dutiful turn to meet those coming towards them hid his teasing smirk. As the little group got closer, Rachel craned her neck around to look at them. Is that the council? She let out in a halfway sound between a laugh and a snort. Is that the council? Are they wearing dresses? Robes, Rachel, Paul said sent her a quarreling look and stepped forward to meet the little group. Gentlemen, Paul Casilla, the presumed leader, a severe man with an absolute proboscis of a nose. Oh, Jewish jokes. Thanks, Jared. Seemed less than pleased as he tromped the last few yards to the grass to reach them. Thesaurus much? Paul nodded to him. An expression impassive. Reuben Stelger. The rest of the group straggled to a stop in a semicircle around Paul, with a grim expressions up and down the line. Only one or two of them wore open. With grim expressions up and down the line, period. Only, capital O, one or two of them wore open. Okay. Wore open, it should be a period, comments that wore open, friendly looks. Stegler cleared his throat, eyeing the incongruous shape of Hope One. Incongruous shape of Hope One sitting just behind them and asked, You had to set it out in the park. He shook his head. You realize this won't make reinstating you any easier. Paul snorted. I didn't come back to take up the governorship again, Reuben. At this pronouncement, a sharp hiss of breath rippled around the gathered council. Paul, we need you. One of the few friendly council members has actually gone pale. People are on the verge of rioting. The anti-technology system has gone so bad, we can't keep it in anymore. Paul, you're the only one who can still has the authority to talk to these people. Paul frowned in concern. Is it really that bad, Standish? So we're just addressing a noob. Standish? Stegler took the lead again, nodding sourly and saving the other man, I'm assuming Standish, from reply. Yes, and setting down Hope One in the middle of the park isn't going to do us any help. The more we remind them of the past, of where we came from, the more fractious they get. Paul looked up at Hope One with a thoughtful look. He looked up with a thoughtful look on his face. And another member of the council spoke. We don't know who that is. We know you believe there are still dangers out there from the outside, Paul. But without your help, there are merely nothing up there to protect. Without Earth tech, we won't even be able to grow food. You know, these people want to destroy everything. They're calling Altaria the New Eden. He snorted derisively. As if we just need to be around picking off the fruit from the trees, you know? He eyed the fruitless evergreen-like trees nearby. New hyphenated word, neologism. Balefully. He eyed them balefully, as if it was somehow the tree's fault. The colonists had found plenty of native vegetation on their arrival, but none of it was edible. Their only food came from what they brought with them and the meager seed stock they carried across the stars to this verdant new home. Thankfully, the earth plants grew well enough in Etrian soil that they didn't have anything to worry about if they were smart about how they used their resources. So you have to be worried. So you gotta be worried about me becoming your king? Paul's troubled glare raked across the little group. He seemed almost horrified rather than angry. The council looked uncomfortable, but one man, stocky and bearded, actually nodded, while several others shrugged. Stegler sounded almost resigned. Something has to be done, if not a king. Stegler looked at Standish, who had seemed about to speak. And no, I don't care what you call it, Standish. It's a king we're talking about meeting him. And where your title when attached. It's not a king. Well, what would you suggest we call him there, Paul? A sharp, mocking voice cut in. And so, you would make him a king. Indeed, even if not in word. Because whatever he suggests now, you will accept. Not without your grumbling. Make you feel important. But accept it, you will. Y'all fools. The new voice came in from beyond the circle of the council near the trees that are growing along the boundary where the park meets the city proper. Everyone turned to see who the fuck was speaking, and several members of the council let out groans. Who asked you, Radog? Stegler growled between clenched teeth. Paul snorted again, this time in amusement, and raised a hand in gritting. Seaver Radog, it's good to see you, bro. Can you always count on you for a dose of honesty, coon dog? Seaver the rat dog snorted into her. His face twisted in disgust, but his eyes twinkled. Don't know how that happens. Not much good to be found. Not much good to be found around here. That's certain. Seeing you is an improvement, though. The admission was grudging, though he did send a smile in Paul's direction. A moment later, though his glare once more assaulted the council and the right to tell everybody what to do. What does Teslery even mean, Stegler? Teslery? Paul raised an eyebrow, looking towards the council, who shuffled. They shuffled sheepishly. A few folded their hands behind their backs to hide the lace edging of their sleeves behind their robes. Stegler's mouth was turned down at the corners in the distance, but he answered quickly enough. It was all we could think of, Paul. The Teslery was an advisory council. Consider the effects of the emergence trace 6 and technology upon the population as a whole. The robes were your idea, Ridding smirkling triumphantly. And you went along, Stegler shot back. He shook his head in frustration and turned to face Paul squarely. Even Stevens was worried enough about his situation and joined as a founding member of the council. Paul, when he put on the robes, he was deadly serious. It was Redding's turn. I don't know who any of these people are, why we should care about them, or how we're going back and forth between 6 people in dialogue. We don't know who the fuck they are. Paul owns a spaceship. He parked in the space lawn that people are upset about. His wife, Gretchen, or whatever the hell her name was, who talks like a Yenta, is now out of it. Oh. So now we have 6 council members in robes. Now it was Radding's turn. I don't know who that is, to look uncomfortable. He nodded grudgingly. Somebody had to keep an eye on you. I don't trust you, Stegler. Stegler also shook his head, exasperated, and looked at Paul. Something has to be done. Stegler. Stegler has to be this one then. Stegler shook his head, exasperated, like something has to be done. You can't be the only last hope we have left. The people are ready to destroy every scrap of technology we brought with us. Without Lastis or some other handy target, they're blaming Emergency 6 for what happened. And any technology we brought with us for this fair game, they've already started wrecking whatever they can lay their grubby hands on. Luddites! 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 The grumble came from somewhere in the knot of council members. They all held the same sentiment. Luddites! Lower Knights, Lower Knights. Paul considered Stegler for a moment, then asked, well, if I told you there was 5 ships of Lasky schooners were preparing to descend on Atria, would that change anything? Paul's scowl was more thoughtful than fierce. I'm not sure how it's possible. And he stared, wait, Paul, wait. Okay. Paul's scowl was more thoughtful than fierce, and as he stared Paul in the eye, Stegler's determined expression turned to mush and trickled off his face. There you have it. Are you certain, Stegler? Stegler's face had taken on a greenish tint, and he looked queasy. The rest of the council was equally stunned. One or two seemed suddenly at the point of bolting. These men had led their colony through hell to get away from Earth only a few years before, and this news threatened to bring hell calling on them once more. Paul sighed, nah, not yet. He shook his head, but there may be worse things out there than even the lattice Rowland. Sievler Redding, still standing several paces back from the council, let a sharp laugh. Ho, 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 ho. Even you haven't seen the worst. Oh, no, he's the serious one. Huh. Even you haven't seen the worst of it yet. His eyes were haunted. Paul glanced over to Redding's face, his expression grave, and asked, why? What have you seen, old friend? Redding shook his head and grimaced, as if it's some sort of internal pain. Then his face spasmed, and his voice was barely a croak. From the void they come, beyond the edge of the real, untouched by the powers of creation, inimical to light. Redding bent over and retched and straightened up and met Paul's eye once more. Though his voice had returned to normal when he spoke, the situation here sucks. But we have really no idea what we are fighting then. I've seen it. With that, Redding turned and stumbled back toward the city, leaving the council frozen in his wake. Paul was staring at his friends retreating back when Stegler finally spoke, half strangled. Well, you must go. Will you at least advise us before you leave? Or speak to the people, talk to them, maybe? Paul chuckled dryly, without humor, and then nodded. Give them what they want. Straggler looked like a deer in the headlights of an oncoming vehicle, like a space deer in the oncoming space lights of an oncoming space vehicle. But we'll starve. Paul shook his head. You said that tell stories a council to advise them the effects of Edge Magic Race 6 and then technology. So advise them. Strangler shook his head too. These people shaking their heads. We've told them technology is necessary, but they won't listen. Paul closed his eyes. So he closed his eyes, shook his head now, even more serious now. Not at all. Let them destroy the Entragement 6 technology. Every one of you has the gene. You can use the power yourself. Preserve the necessary tech, the old tech. Let the rest go. He scowled at them. Now leave us in peace. We are outbound. We be outbound again after lunch. Stegler thought over Paul's suggestion for a moment, then nodded slowly. I suppose, yes, we may be able to do that. He blinked. If only humans were able to use Enderbean 6, imagine. Paul looked as if he'd been bitten by something sour. Bitten something sour, not been bitten by it. But he shrugged. Needs of the moment. Even if it's cost, we may regret it. One by one, the council paid their respects and turned to leave. As they too trudged down the hill, Paul spoke once more to their retreating backs. I cannot be your king. I may at best be your advisor. At worst, a guardian, watching the darkness on my front porch, my 12 gauge, my flask of Jim Beam. That was not in the original manuscript. Watching them walk down the hill, A little knot of gray robes among the springtime green of the surrounding park. Rachel asked, "Daddy, why do we even come back here anyway, Daddy?" Paul sighed. "I should say it was to check on them. But the real answer is I came back because I missed the sky. We weren't made for the void, and you shouldn't have grown up in the darkness." Rachel's reply came out far more grumpy than she'd intended, but it fit her mood. "Yeah, but dealing with people is complicated." Paul was silent for a long moment, then smiled crookedly over at her. "Without other people, we go crazy. People are important, even if they're complicated." Rachel snorted. "True tongue is enough to drive me crazy all by herself." Paul scowled at her. "I told you, leave Matilda alone, Rachel." Then more gently, "She's just trying to help. Light makers knows all the little gentle ways of the heart. They know that enough of that." Rachel bit back her retort with some difficulty. Her dad deserved better than her vented spleen. She wasn't really angry at him anyway. Rachel had never known her mother. She died before Rachel had been old enough to remember her. Paul was the best dad she could imagine, though everything that had happened to her since then sucked. She didn't know why she was so angry. She had been that way since they left Earth, but it wasn't fair to aim it at her dad, however much she wanted to sometimes. They finished their lunch in silence, enjoying the cool, fresh breeze and the beauty of the world around them. Rachel's initial instinct to pout slowly subsided. She didn't like Shrewtongue Matheson, but she couldn't help admitting to herself that her father had been right about the picnic. There was something about the blue of the sky and the emerald hues of the surrounding park that gave them a peace nothing in space could. It was with some reluctance that they re-entered Hope and lifted off once more into the skies of Atria, and from there to the blackness of space beyond. Paul, John, No Oxford, and Rachel all sat in silence in Hope's command center until the Recton drive came on. Gravity returned, and Rachel asked, "So we're going to the readout?" Paul gave her a sidelong look and nodded briefly. Rachel sighed. "Why, Dad? Why can't we even work with the matter transistor property here?" Paul frowned, then thought a moment before he answered. "Y'all know how the intradramatic 6 emissions from the stars are so strong?" Rachel nodded impatiently. "That's what I'm talking about. It makes experiment with E6 about 29 times more harder." Paul nodded in return. "Yeah, and still thoughtful." He said, "Yeah, and that's why we came to the Milky Way. It couldn't be designed here to be a Recton drive, could it?" The particular line of thought obviously hadn't occurred to John before, who is somehow also part of the conversation. He stared at Paul openly. Is this an open stare? "You saying that somebody called us there on purpose when we came there from Earth to give us cover?" Paul gave him a tight smile. "Maybe I remember." He trailed off, his eyes far away, then changed the subject after a long moment. "We're not the only ones he would hide, though, are we?" He was silent in the command center for a long time. Then Rachel asked quietly, "You really think Laxus is coming after us?" This time, Paul's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, when he escaped Earth, we punched straight through the fabric of space. We was outside everything that's real. When we came here, we punched back through it from wherever we was. Anyway, anybody who thinks we didn't leave some kind of track is crazy." And well, he trailed off after a moment, seeming troubled. "Well, what, Dad?" John asked, when it was clear that Paul wasn't going to continue. "Well, I'm worried it might be more like a funnel than just leaving a trace behind, like a funnel." He looked at them soberly. "I'm even more worried that if anybody came through, it would warp even more." Fuck would you think that? That makes It took a moment for both of them to digest Paul's statement. It's going to take me 3 years to digest this narrative. And John's reply was puzzled, almost dubious. Not quite. It was puzzled, but almost dubious. Dad, you remember what they said? We were going to watch that old Earth science fiction show on the other day, and they said they ripped a hole in the subspace? Paul grinned at him. Yeah, I know. Everything moving through space so fast, there's actual damage to the fabric of space. We leave behind it instantly. We can't even tell how fast we're really going because there's no new fixed reference point. So what then? Rachel knew her skepticism was obvious, but she couldn't help it. Paul grimaced, groping for the words he needed to express what he was thinking. What I'm trying to describe is that more complicated than just a hole in space. It's more like a portal. Like when we came back through, however we got here, we created an off-ramp. Like back into reality that was anchored to whatever the real things were around us. We shouldn't even have been able to get back at all. You realize that? I tried twice before and it never worked. I could sense reality was everywhere. But we were caught on all the other sides of reality. And I couldn't get us back. It was the redoubt that I got a hold of. The third time I tried. And the question is how or who? This time, when Paul fell silent, neither John nor Rachel interrupted his thoughts. Over the next month, as the three patrolled the dense, bright star cluster, they had doubled the redoubt. So that's a quadrupling of the doubt? Not sure. Rachel thought back often to their picnic. In hindsight, she was glad her father had sat down but you know what? This father's a piece of shit. I'm sad for these kids simping for their... It was a time she would never forget. Despite her appreciation for the memory, Rachel preferred being out among the stars. While John seemed able to more or less fit in wherever they landed, she had never really related to others her own age, her apparent age. Biologically and subjectively, she was over 25 now, even though she still looked and felt no more than 13. Don't do it, Jared. Nobody could really explain it, and she got tired of the sidelong glances and whispered comments about how old and how odd she was. Not that she left such comments unchallenged. Period. Out among the stars, she and John, often with Paul's help, spent most of their time learning how to use Emergenmatic 6. They only gained the ability to access the power shortly before they escaped Earth. She still wasn't completely clear on the details, nor are any of us, but she knew that her dad and Carl Winton and Lattice Rowland had a lot to do with it. Sounds sus. She'd actually been 12 years old at the time, and nobody wanted to tell her what was really going on. Now, there was no prying anything out of her dad about it at all, and everything else seemed to think as the past was dead, and Shu Tong did. At best, as best as she could piece it together, soon after Emergenmatic Trace 6 was discovered, her dad and Carl Winton had learned that Lattice Rowland was planning to take over the world using the new energy device. Well, son gone. She knew that in those early days it had been almost theoretical. She remembered that her dad talking about it like people talked about physics or magic. Same things, really. And then everything changed, and he started acting like it was a real thing, just like physics or magic. And he could reach out and touch it. Rachel still wasn't sure how humans, especially Lattice, had gained the ability to use Emergenmatic 6 directly. She knew the rest of the world, including herself and John, had gotten their own ability to use it after you got sick with the fever, as Daddy said, a modified version of scarlet fever. She thought her dad and Carl had something to do with that too, but Paul was always challenging the subject when she asked. The thought made her even more grumpy. She did not like knowing things. Come to think of it, she hadn't asked Seaver Ratting, though. He would know. If anybody in the universe would tell her, it would be Seaver Ratting! Exclamation mark. However it happened, she and John had gained control of Energy Matrix 6 shortly before they left Earth during the Troubles. Being able to control it didn't mean they were able to use it effectively, though, and the way their dad could. Rachel still wasn't even sure how Paul had come by the ability to use Edgerman X6 as well as he did. It was when she was about 10 years old, so 3 years before she remembers she was 3 years old, which is 13 years before now, that Daddy first saved both her and John with his own power, and that was before the Troubles or the fever. That was really all she knew. And as usual, Daddy wasn't talking. Rachel snorted in annoyance. He had lost focus. She had lost focus on her weave, like a hair weave, and on the threads of power. The threads of power she'd been manipulating tangled incomprehensibly. She growled and threw the entire construct out through the wall of the command center into the space beyond, where it subsequently shredded itself into oblivion in a minor energy discharge. So she just threw it in a fucking space. Well, folks, that's about all we're getting today. I'll tell you what, it's been a joy.